Welcome to our Wisconsin Literacies Fall Conference. This afternoon, we are going to have a session on AI and how to integrate it into your day through a more equitable lens. And I'd like to introduce Caroline McKinnon and Joey Lehrman from Skill Rise at ISTE. I'll turn it over to you.
Hey everyone, good afternoon. My name is Joey Lehrman, and I'm joined today by my colleague Caroline McKinnon from ISTE Skill Rise Initiative. We're excited to be with you today as we explore some ideas for how to use AI, both as an adult educator and ways that students might be able to use it as well. So I'm going to share my screen to get started with the session. Any of you that have been to our sessions before might know that we tend to start with tech tips as a way to create kind of a peer learning environment. It's actually a favorite habit of mine for students as well, kind of starting each class with a short tech tip as students get in the habit of teaching each other different digital literacy tips and showcasing different ways to use technology. Of course, our tech tip today is about AI itself. And so with AI, there's an option to share your thread, kind of similar to how you can share a Google Doc and give someone access to view your content. You can do the same kind of thing with an AI thread, which is something I would keep in mind as we get further in today's session. Some questions that commonly arise about AI is like, hey, how do we nurture critical thinking? How do we limit over-reliance on it so students are also building critical thinking skills alongside their use of AI? And being able to share their thread could be one strategy for that. So for example, when students submit an assignment, it's okay if they use AI, they should just share their thread with it. So then you and the student and peer learners can look at the different prompting strategies and how the student interfaced with AI as a way to kind of nurture a collaborative environment where we're reflecting about our prompting skills and using that as a chance to create kind of a peer learning environment. And so you'll notice in Gemini and ChatGPT and Claude, some of the more popular and free tools, there is this option to share a thread. And so I'd encourage you to check that out and explore ways that you could do that with your peers, as colleagues, as you all kind of build prompting skills together, but then also with adult learners as they share their threads with each other and kind of reflect about that experience. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Caroline and we'll get into today's session.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Caroline, as Joey mentioned before. I work alongside Joey, and you can probably tell from my accent that I'm based here in Brooklyn, New York. Been working on this accent for a long time. So Joey and I are both adult educators. That's really the roles that we've both spent a long time working in the field of adult education. Joey will tell you a tiny bit more about his background. Mine is certainly in international education, working a lot in equity and technology, working with refugees and survivors of torture and trafficking. So that has been my main focus. And Joey, do you want to just tell us a little bit about you and where you're from?
Yeah, hey Al. I'm born and raised in Minnesota, so nice to connect with some colleagues in Wisconsin. I currently live in Berea, Kentucky, and like Caroline mentioned, I'm a career adult educator. I'm going to keep emphasizing that through today's session because I'm not necessarily an expert on a lot of these topics. Instead, I have a background in distance learning, blended learning, and technology use in adult education. And so I'm using a lot of words to essentially say, you're all experts here too. And we're excited to learn alongside you as we kind of explore these new tools and what they might mean for the future of adult learning.
Thank you, Joey. So if we think about AI, I'm old enough to remember that AI was basically going to be this big robot that came down and took over the planet and started the next world war. In fact, everything to do with Hollywood has told us that AI is leading in that way. But the reality is AI is at a stage where sometimes it is able to identify as a cat, as a dog. So we're not as advanced as we perhaps want to be here. And we're going to look today at some things that might be very, very basic to you. That's okay. But there are other things that, you might have more questions on, and we do welcome that. So really what I would like to do is to get you thinking a little bit about AI. Who has used AI already today? Just a thumbs up in Zoom would be great if you have. Okay. Seeing a couple of hands up there, but not a lot of hands up. Did anyone use GPS today? Okay. What about using your phone to look in your spam folder and your normal folder on your email? Okay, we see more hands as we're going up. Did anyone make an online appointment? Anyone buy coffee? We're seeing more and more hands go up as we look at this. Anyone use Siri or Alexa? Let me tell you, the amount of times today that I've spoken to a Siri is unreal. In fact, I've spoken to Siri more often than I've spoken to my husband, which is no reflection on my husband, more on the nature of the questions that I had for it. Now, all of these are AI driven. They're not exactly what we imagine AI to be, but the minute we ask our email to separate what is a spam text or a spam email or a regular email, we're asking an AI to do some of the work for us. So as you can see, we're interacting with AI on a daily basis in some form or another. The fact is, AI, the terminology for AI has been around since the 1950s. And in fact, if you want to go back even longer, it's a sort of science fiction term that was coined around computer and thinking and dreaming up this idea of AI is taking over the world, coming back to the Hollywood thing. But right now, AI is far away from that. It's progressing and it's progressing fast. So one of the things that I will say to you is, whatever you're learning now, if you revisit this in, I'm going to say 6 months, it's probably even in less time than that, things will have moved on. Things will have progressed. The more we use AI, the more it's going to progress. So we'll be looking at some very, very basic AI all the way through. So moving on to the next slide. Yeah. We have our first question, and we're going to ask you to put your answers in the chat here. And really, what we want to do is we want to ask you what you think AI cannot do. Now, many times you're going to be asked the question, what can AI do? And I've already listed some of those. What can it not do? Don't be shy. There's no right or wrong answer. We're just curious at this stage. I can't empathize. Fantastic. Can't raise your daughter. Can't feel. Understand the student's struggle. Okay. Get the right number of fingers in images. Somebody's been studying AI there. Excellent. Show compassion. Any other ideas? I have a second question to this. What would be the #1 thing that you would want AI to do? I'll be honest, mine is very much about something in my house. I would like it to read what I have in my fridge, how near the food is to going off, what I need to buy, something more practical. Generate possibilities. Oh, I like that answer. Do my chores, absolutely. Assess and evaluate. Oh, these are great. Yeah, Joey, I have the same question of Lisa. Lisa, what kind of possibilities would you like AI to generate? Reveal when it has been used. Oh, I like that. Stop scammers and hackers. Yeah, I mean, wouldn't that be wonderful? Excellent. So I love some of these ideas. So really, when we're thinking about this, we're all acknowledging that computers can't feel, they can't bring that empathy, and they can't understand students in the way that we want them to. And the good news for us all is that's great, because we don't actually want them to do that a lot of the time, because that will remove the connection we have with the students. So let's have a quick look here. Oh, Lisa says, I use it now when creating curriculum for learners, lists of words for conjugation. Excellent. Yeah, it's really good at bringing out your ideas for a classroom. So next, if we look at how computers work, Who here speaks another language? Anyone? Again, hands up. Got some hands going up. Okay. Excellent. I like language learners. This is my background, linguistics. In some ways, I like to equate AI to a toddler. You know, it's still learning, it's faltering a little bit, it's getting there, it's getting its steps. But I don't think that's necessarily as helpful to the jobs that you do, the roles that you do, and working in literacy or with language and ESL students. For me, I think of AI as being language learning. Yeah? When you're learning a language, there are certain stages that you go through. The first one usually is perception. You're recognizing that language, you're hearing the language, you are making certain guessworks around it, but maybe you're noticing the difference, like a Japanese speaker, for example, with the L's and the R's being very different. So that is the perception part, and that is what a computer is doing. Then it's using representation and reasoning. And within this, when you're learning a language, you're using a logic model quite often to apply what you've heard, and is this going to be how you produce the language? For example, when you understand that in Spanish, among other languages, that you need to put the adjective after the noun. And so learning something like that through hearing and reasoning, I've heard this 4 times now, so therefore this must be the structure in a language. Then when we get to the learning section, this is where we're memorizing, we're practicing, we're using flashcards, we're learning new vocabulary, we're marking the vocabulary in whichever our preferred form of learning is. And then the natural interaction is when we're bringing it together and maybe we are going to a restaurant and ordering food in that language. So we're interacting and using everything that we've brought together to produce something. And if you have learned a language, you know yourself that you may learn it all and it's fantastic and you're really confident, and then suddenly you go to Spain on vacation and you order some food and the waiter looks at you, shaking his head, and responds in English. It happens. And that's the way that AI picks up information. Sometimes it will come with an answer for you that isn't relevant to what you're doing, but it's learning, it's replicating this. So always imagine there that you're in control of this. If you don't like the answer an AI gives, you can go back and ask again. So here at SkillRise, we believe that AI has the potential to help build a more equitable and inclusive learning space. Really do. But in order for us to really look at this, we need to understand that the system isn't perfect. And in fact, it's far from perfect. AI is populated by systems that have already existed. And these systems, we all know, are full of bias. Sometimes they're perpetuating stereotypes. If you look at textbooks, and I'm sure in the past we've all looked at textbooks, and I remember in one in particular I used working with ESL students, that every time there was an Asian student, they had a book in their hand or glasses. But every time there was a Latino student, they were having fun around the city. And this isn't a way of perpetuating the stereotypes. And currently, AI has those limitations as well. Now, the more we build it out, the more we're going to be able to explore how to avoid that as we go. It isn't only bias that's associated with gender or race, although there are probably some great examples there in general. We'll be looking at different ways that this could show up, especially when your students are learning it. Does anyone have any idea of one way that might immediately show up if your students are of low literacy level or English is not their first language and they're using something like ChatGPT? What could be the first thing that this produces from one of their questions? Pop your answer in the chat if you have any ideas. No? Aha. Generate first drafts of dialogue. Yes. Yes. It can be casual. It can use too much slang. If a student's using the wrong words, it can really misunderstand something. It can give, if you just think about the English language, one word can have many, many different meanings. So contextualizing the vocabulary is necessary in a classroom environment. So using it in an AI means that the AI is going to interpret your meaning there, and the student could go down a completely different route of where they wanted to be. So it's about filtering and getting the right information. One used awesome 6 times. We don't say it as much. As a Brit here, the way that when I go back to the UK, people say to me, "Oh my goodness, you sound so American now." Apparently it's because I use awesome, which would never be used in the UK. Yes, AI is picking up on those models. It's replicating those language issues. So AI has bias. It can negatively affect non-native speakers. It might look at the pattern of the speaking, and that could be in the written form or the spoken form. But in particular, in the written form, it will accuse of plagiarism for work that is basically just because it's a different structure. The one thing it has definitely done is shown gender bias. It shows gender bias in roles. For example, here is a nurse, she, every time. But look, here's the director, he's a man. Sorry, all the gentlemen in this room, if you're a teacher, you're likely to be labeled as female. And it's still learning within that system. And again, it depends on the information it's given to bring out. So it's really important when we're using this to make sure that the students themselves know of the limitations. It can make for an interesting conversation as we're going along. So we're going to show you a short video next. Now this is a longer video, and at the end we'll give you all the links to all of this, but this is a short video from the London school, the London Interdisciplinary School. Now they are a model school that allows students to make up their own degrees. And by making up your own degree, it doesn't mean, although you probably could, that you can do, and this is for Jamie in particular, doesn't mean you could make a degree in Wu-Tang lyrics from the 1990s onwards. What it means is that they recognize that you might want to do ethics as well as English literature and bring your course together. So they wanted to look at how AI image generators could make bias worse. So we're going to show you a couple of minutes of this. I want you to think about the bias you're seeing within this. Now, one thing to note is everything in this video is AI generated, from the voiceover to the imagery.
Barbie with biased AI image generators. What does a typical prisoner look like? What about a lawyer, a nurse, a drug dealer? What about a fast food worker, a cleaner, a terrorist, or a CEO? These are all images created by an artificial intelligence image generator called Midjourney, which creates unique images based off of simple word prompts. These AI image generators have exploded in popularity thanks to their impressive results and ease of use. Within a few years, as much as 90% of the images on the internet could be artificially generated. Given that generative AI will have a huge impact in shaping our visual landscape, it's important to understand that the reality it presents can often be distorted, where harmful biases relating to gender, race, age, and skin colour can be more exaggerated and more extreme than in the real world. Leonardo Nicoletti and Dina Bass at Bloomberg Technology generated and analysed more than 5,000 images created by Stable Diffusion. They prompted it to generate portraits of workers in different professions and sorted the images according to skin tone and perceived gender. They found that higher paying professions like CEO, lawyer, and politician were dominated by lighter skin tones, while subjects with darker skin tones were more commonly associated with lower income jobs like dishwasher, janitor, and fast food worker. A similar story emerged when categorizing by gender, with higher income jobs such as doctors, CEOs, and engineers being predominantly represented by men, whilst professions like cashier, social worker, and housekeeper were mostly represented by women. These racial and gender biases were found to be stronger than the reality of what was recorded in the US Bureau of Labor Statistics. For instance, women make up 39% of doctors in the US, but only appeared in 7% of the images. These exaggerated biases that AI systems create are known as representational harms. These are harms which degrade certain social groups by reinforcing the status quo or by amplifying stereotypes. A particularly extreme example was created when BuzzFeed published an article of AI-generated Barbies from different countries around the world. The Barbies from Latin America were all presented as fair-skinned, perpetuating a form of discrimination known as colorism, where lighter skin tones are favoured over darker ones. The Barbie from Germany was dressed in clothes reminiscent of an SS Nazi uniform, and the Barbie from South Sudan was depicted holding a rifle by her side.
Okay. So as you
This
can
is
see,
why
as you can see there, AI is not replicating the real world in some ways. It's replicating the machines that are feeding it. So if you think about your students here, unless you are telling them specifically how to use the AI in the context they're going to have, it may seem to provide barriers to them that don't exist. Representation can be quite often a big barrier towards technology. And a student who, for example, using their example there, and not the most extreme one, if we take the example of the Barbie who came from Peru, she was very light-skinned, and in fact, I think she had slightly blonde hair. There is no connection to a student who perhaps is Peruvian or to that understanding. So AI has made it seem like a dark-skinned person is either not Peruvian or not worth representing in that way. Also, if you notice, the jobs in particular, I think AI there, I want to bring it back to where I say that it's almost like a toddler. I think of the gender stereotypes that exist for young children quite often, where in toys, if you are a boy, you get to play with the more construction-based one, and the women would have the more household ones. And AI is really perpetuating these biases as we go along. AI is also fallible. AI, somebody mentioned earlier about the inability of AI to get hands right. AI has done a lot worse than just get hands wrong. If you look here, the first one was the AI prompt was, give me a picture of salmon in the river. And this is exactly what AI did. Now, did AI do anything wrong? Or is this exactly what salmon in the river is? It is exactly what salmon in the river is. And the second one was a woman holding an umbrella, apparently holding it with her skull. So I would say over the last 6 months, AI has changed already. So for example, these are happening less and less, and it's not always an obvious thing. Somebody mentioned earlier about how it would be wonderful to know when things have been generated by AI. And quite often in technologies that's coming forward, it will ask you to mark it. It's some of the social media now asks you if it was AI generated. But of course, this is self-reported. So it's not always going to work out well. And if you're not aware of the signs, then you might fall for something. I want to say at this point, it doesn't mean that you're going to know all the signs. I'm sure that every one of us could fall for some of the AI scams out there. There are some that are incredibly sophisticated, but knowing certain ones along the way will help students and help all of you know when to use it correctly or when to avoid it in some ways.
This is
So looking forward, we have some images here. And I want you to vote on these images. The voting is this. Only vote if you think it's a real image. Okay? If it isn't, just keep your hand down. The first image is this. If you think this is a real image, please put a thumb up. Okay. Yep. A few people. But mostly hands are down here. Not a very suspicious group of people, I've noticed. Yeah, that's good. It might serve you well. Oh, more hands are going up now. Excellent. So, Joey, what is the reveal here? The reveal here is that this is a real photo. This is taken in Death Valley National Park in California. It's 100% genuine. Crazy. Someone said, yeah, I mean, the photographer was amazing here, right? But yeah, this is a real photo, but of course it does look AI generated. Here we go. Photo number 2, same thing, same question. Is this a real photo? Okay, we got a couple of hands up. Yeah. Now, mixing this up slightly, if you think this is a fake photo, put in the chat why you think that this might be AI generated. Let's see your justifications. Although there's lots of hands going up at this point. The background is too crisp. Nice, okay. Someone's torn in between them. You can't get that close to the bridge. I like that one. The perspective is off. The lines on the people are too precise compared to the background. Okay, these are all good. They seem photoshopped into the foreground. Excellent. Okay, well, here is the reality about that one. It is AI generated, this photo. Okay. Your answers for the reasons why were fantastic, but none of them actually were the ones that would stand out, perhaps, to some people. They would have been more towards the, if you look at the textures of the backpack, the straps, they're inconsistent. The lanyard he has around his neck is disjointed in places. Sometimes with AI, it gets confused by texture. Okay, we have 3 ladies at lunch. Now, this really does look like, you know, the stock photos where it says 3 women eating salad. Put your hand up if you think this is real or false. I mean, if you think this is real. Oh, someone there definitely mentioning fingers. So many fingers. And AI. Okay. Does anyone think this photo is real? Nobody wants to bet some money on it being real? No, there's some definite shakes of the head there. Okay. Correct. This is AI generated. Whoever noticed the hands, have a look at the woman wearing the brown, her hands. She is obviously clasped hands, but therefore she has 3 hands. And then the hands of the lady in the middle, I'm not sure what's going on. AI, even to this day, and some of the systems have big problems with hands, okay, or particularly more specifically with fingers. Here we go, avocado toast. I live in Brooklyn, New York. This is a standard. Is this real or not real? If you think this is real, please put your hand up. If you think this is AI, please give us a reason why. Okay. We've got people saying it's real. Yeah. The lime looks too flat. Okay. AI seems to be floating. Okay. But this is the one that has everyone 50-50. We have no people in the photo here. We have food. The corner of the toast looks off. Ooh. The wood grain isn't consistent on the table. This is a room full of detectives, I will say. Some of this I haven't noticed before, but let's see. It is AI generated. Okay. And the detectives in this room, the prize is actually going to whoever mentioned the lime here. Have a look at the lime. It's a very, very odd shape. And the other reason, which I didn't notice until now, and I do agree, is the crust is too perfect. That it looks like it's been hand painted. But the point of this is, these are just fun images. We have one more. Is this real? What do we think? Someone says it's real. Some people say this is real. If you think this is AI, why do you think it's AI? Oh, Paula, you're very on this immediately. Okay. This one is real. This was taken through the window above Steve Jobs' theater in California at the Apple headquarters. So the distortion there is really from the glass that it was taken. I think this is actually an amazing image. And when I first started looking at AI and the way that images can be manipulated, 100% I would have said that this is AI generated, of somebody telling me to show an office of the future. That's what I would have thought of. So really, when we're looking at AI and images, there are two things that to take away here. Firstly, don't avoid using images that might have been AI. And the reason I say this is because there's a lot of vocabulary and learning that can come out for students by using and discussing what's happening in a photo. They can also discuss sort of the surrounding areas of it, but it gets them to be a little bit more aware of the imagery they're seeing, especially when we're talking about the amount of manipulation that happens on social media for some imagery. It's a good tool for students to be aware of what they could be looking for. But as you've seen, I would have fallen for this Steve Jobs one, so we're not perfect. So I wanted to include this quote here from the US Department of Labor, which is that everyone in education has a responsibility to harness the good to serve educational priorities while also protecting against the dangers that may arise as a result of AI being integrated into educational technology. And the reason I really like this is because all of you are educators. And like any new technology that comes around, is quite often thrust upon educators. And they're like, here's this new tool. Now we need to use it. But there's no real training. You're very lucky that you have training on this. I've spoken to many educators who have just been told, here's ChatGPT. How are you going to use it in your class, or how are you going to ban it in your class? Which really isn't a way of teaching people how to do this. But the good news is for educators, is that you're not alone in this. Teachers might be at the forefront of using AI. And actually, I would argue that in some ways you're the most important part of the AI system, because AI can only produce what is put into it. And you're the people using it and inputting that. So you'll be the ones in some ways creating the systems to hopefully combat the bias and the issues with equity. Oh, I love Trina's picture of the students or the people studying. There needs to be also a regulatory framework in place. I think personally that we need to have DEI experts involved in this. It can't be tech companies, and it can't be on the responsibility of educators. There needs to be a broader discussion about AI as it's going through. AI developers need to be more diverse. If you go into any AI tech room, there is not enough representation at the table. And there needs to be some governance as well. Like, how do we use this? When can we use this? But the good news is, it's not on you to do that. Okay, you just need to use it. You need to play around with it. You need to work out how to use it with your students to create a more equitable system. So before we go on to the next part, which is where you get to take a few steps in this wilderness of AI and play around a little bit, just want to ask in the chat if there are any questions. And Shannon, I love that. Our observations and deduction skills will grow as AI does. Agreed. I think, you know, if you went back probably even just say 3-4 years ago, and you think about phone calls that were from an unknown number, whereas now we know it's possibly spam. Yeah, so we're getting that sort of detective work under our belts as we go along. Okay, so if there are no questions here, let's move to the time to play with it and see what we can do with AI itself. So the first thing we're going to talk about is engineering. Has anyone heard the terminology prompt engineering? Yes. Okay, prompt engineering is possibly, I think, one of the most important things to learn. Now, the first thing I will say here is we had a conversation, Joey and I, about whether to include this slide. And we included it on my assistance, but Joey might be right here, and I'm owning that because AI can change so much that this is a framework that's widely accepted of how we work with prompt engineering, but things are changing rapidly. And this is something to definitely keep in mind with anything you do with AI is whatever you learn today is just the start of this, and you're going to be constantly learning and updating things. Issues that we're going to be highlighting as bad for equity or inclusion might be no longer a problem later down. That's the ideal world that we'll get to, that they're no longer a problem, that we're not dealing with this. So prompt engineering essentially is writing instructions for AI models. So what you want to do is ask them questions that are accurate, relevant, and will be clear. They'll have context. The formatting will be great. The constraints as in setting boundaries. Also giving examples. Now that's a lot to ask somebody using an AI. You have one simple question that you want to ask ChatGPT. My most common question that I use for AI is, what is 175 degrees in? Because when I'm doing cooking and I need to know what the conversion rate is. And that's quite easy for me to just say 175 degrees in Fahrenheit or in Celsius. I'm not sure which one. But that's a very easy thing. But if we want to use AI in a way that is helping our students and helping with inclusion and equity and giving them the skills to use it, we need to think more about the questions that are formed. And this in itself is a practice for students. There's a big difference between saying to ChatGPT, and we have an example here, what can we do about climate change? ChatGPT probably can give me a lot of responses about what we can do about climate change. They're not necessarily going to be succinct. There's going to be perhaps too much information, which can be overwhelming to students. It could possibly make the student feel excluded because they can't understand every word. Now, this is more complex than I would expect a student to do, but having something like provide 3 specific technological solutions to combat climate change, for each solution, briefly explain how it works, potential impact, and one major challenge to implementing it. Limit your response to 150 words per solution. I'm not suggesting at any point that a student is going to come up with a prompt engineering point like that. I can barely do it. The point is to sort of train ourselves and training learners to be more specific about what they're asking. They will get better responses. They will get more understandable responses and responses that they can immediately ask and perhaps ask follow-up questions too. So they're not afraid, they're not put off by going in. One of the biggest barriers for inclusion when it comes to this technology is it can be overwhelming. And if you ask a simple question and you get a scrolling answer that just keeps going on and on, perhaps you're automatically going to step away and say, okay, I can't use this. Okay. So, moving next, I'm going to hand it to Joey, who's going to get a little bit more down and dirty and practical with you all.
Thanks much. Before we continue on, I think I saw a hand raised a minute ago. Did somebody want to unmute and ask a question or pop that into the chat? Obviously, either way is okay with us. So we welcome any questions you might have.
I think it may have been somebody whose hand was still lingering after
Gotcha. That makes
voting
sense.
for AI, but yes, we can take a moment to make sure.
Yeah, thanks for keeping an eye on that. With that, I also want to help give people a chance to start actually playing around with an AI tool. There are lots of options. You can even feel free to Google AI chatbot if you'd like. There's ChatGPT and Cloud and Gemini and Llama and all these different tools you can use. I would suggest ChatGPT for what I'm about to show you on screen. Very simply is that it doesn't require a login, which in the world of adult education over the last 15 years, I'm not sure I've seen an issue more frequently than students just forgetting passwords. And so finding an app that a student can use without needing to log in is such a game changer, in my opinion. So I prefer to go to ChatGPT when I'm working with students because you can just jump in and start prompting. You don't need to log in. You don't need to remember a password. You don't need to create an account. You can just start asking questions similar to what you might do with a Google search. So what I would encourage everyone to do is go over to chatgpt.com, and I'll put that link in chat for quick access. You can just click it and jump right into ChatGPT and try a quick exercise, no more than 30 seconds, a minute, just kind of think through. Imagine you're an adult learner that needs to request a day off so you can chaperone your kid's school field trip, write an email to your supervisor. I'm not going to provide any more prompting than that. So as you jump into ChatGPT, literally say anything you want. Provide any context you want, any direction you want, any kind of voice or tone or length or any details. If you don't like the response you get, try giving feedback and seeing if you can lengthen it or shorten it or change the tone. And so before we go into breakout rooms, I just want everyone to take a minute to try using ChatGPT or another tool if you have a preferred one. And as you prompt to write an email, I'm curious just to hear reactions in the chat. What do you like? What do you not like? What does it produce that's helpful? What does it produce that's unhelpful? How might this be useful for students? Just kind of any general reactions. What do you notice? What do you wonder as you try actually interacting with ChatGPT for the first time? And I'll kind of show on my screen. Write an email asking for a day off so I can chaperone my kid's school field trip. Very simple prompt. And then it starts to draft, gives me a subject line, gives me that output. But this is not about me using AI. I'm curious to hear about your reactions in the chat. As you have it draft an email, what do you notice? What do you wonder? What do you like? What do you not like? And I promise I will actually pause talking for about a minute right now. Give you a chance to actually play around. Any initial reactions as people try? That response actually made me, as you probably saw, laugh out loud a little bit. Not for nothing, yeah, it being more polite could actually be a win. What an opportunity for nurturing a critical thinking conversation with students. Like I would have a student draft the email, have AI draft the email, and then compare it. What do we notice? What do we wonder about our differences between how a student writes it, how AI writes it, and then how can students reflect about that experience to nurture that kind of critical thinking conversation about tone, like you just messaged. Lisa came up with a usable draft. Charles, thank you for being the first to use our tech tip of the day, which is you can share a ChatGPT thread. Clever idea there, so we can kind of see how you prompted and what you learned. I have it loading on a background screen now. Yeah, so we get an example here, request for time off. Has anyone tried giving feedback to say, hey, can you make this shorter? Can you make it longer? Can you change the writing tone? Can you change the style? Anybody have success with giving feedback? Yeah, cool. I'm glad to hear, Shirley, that you're interacting with it now, which is, I think, one of the major distinctions between an AI chatbot and something like Google Search or a search engine, which is we can interact with it. We can give it feedback and tell it what's useful, what's not, and continue that conversation in a thread. Trina not appreciating the, I hope this message finds you well. And I would say, like, try to train it over time. Let it know what writing style you look for. Jamie's seen lots of exclamation points. Awesome. Okay, I want to make sure we have time to jump into breakout rooms. And so I just want to show you a few tips for things to try. And so we're going to open up breakout rooms in a moment. And I just want, people to talk to each other, and I'll give you some discussion questions. But I just want to give you some sample ideas of prompts that you can feel free to use. So for example, Generate activity ideas that will help adult students learn how to build a budget. So even in this example, I'm not even looking for a full lesson plan. I just want some basic activity ideas. Or the second prompt, which I think can be helpful for preparing for lesson delivery. Review this lesson plan and anticipate student responses. What observations might they make? What questions might students ask? How would you respond? So as a teacher planning to prepare for a lesson, I want to start to anticipate what are the problems my students might experience with this lesson? What are the common questions they might have? And how can I be ready to nurture and facilitate a conversation based on those responses that I'm going to anticipate? I know I'm moving kind of quickly, but I'm going to broadcast these out as well. I want to give you one more kind of advanced tip, which is you can bring content into ChatGPT. So for example, I'm going to load a lesson here or an article here. This is about inflation, the difference between real and nominal wages, a topic that all of our adult learners and educators are familiar with in the last few years, the difference between inflation and inflation-adjusted prices or real and nominal wages, but it can be a tricky concept. And so I go into Google Chrome reading mode, which allows me to very quickly copy the entire article. And what I mean by bringing this content in is I can copy and paste this entire article and ask for different explanations. So for example, rewrite this article at a 4th, 7th, and 10th grade reading level. And so I'm going to say exactly that at a 4th, 10th, and 4th, 7th, and 10th grade reading level. But notice here that I use triple quotes when I paste the article in. The triple quotes is telling ChatGPT that this is different content. This is not my prompt. I want you to treat this content differently than the prompt that I'm providing. So I wrap it in triple quotes. And now I'm getting the thanks for trying it. But you can see in the background, the 4th grade reading level is written a little more simply with bullet points, key points, articles like that. The last thing I'll say is you can also analyze accessibility. So copy and paste the lesson plan and say, how can I make this lesson more accessible? I have students with limited digital literacy skills. What kind of supports might they need? And so as you get into breakout rooms, I'd encourage you to hey, try copy and pasting an article and bringing that in. See what kind of questions you can ask based on bringing content into ChatGPT. Try to translate to different languages. Try to simplify, just prompt, ask questions, give reactions, things like that, and just talk to each other. And as you do, kind of just curious to hear reactions from breakout rooms. How might you use AI with students and in your workflow? And what's a question or idea you have? So just kind of some simple reflections based on talking to each other as you try ChatGPT in another tab. And so again, try to analyze accessibility, translate, adapt to different reading levels, create activity ideas, just a few different prompts to play around with the tool and see what kind of reactions you have, and then come back to share any highlights of your conversation. As you're in breakout rooms too, I'll just kind of broadcast a few ideas to run with as you're in there. So any questions before we open up the breakout rooms?
There was a question in the chat. Can you repeat what the triple quote marks?
Yeah, great question. So I wish I had logged in so I could show you kind of cleanly, but I'm gonna stay logged out here. So when I start talking to AI, it's assuming I'm prompting it. But if I wanted to analyze an article for me, pull out data, simplify an article, I needed to understand that, hey, this is the article, this is my prompt. And so wrapping content in triple quotes is a signifier. It's a delineator for ChatGPT that says, this is content. It's not me prompting you anymore. I want you to take my prompt and apply it to this content. And so that's a way to help it kind of better understand instructions versus a CSV with spreadsheet that you upload or an article that you copy and paste into ChatGPT. Yep. Yeah, Caroline, great summary in chat. Thank you for that. So again, jump into breakout rooms and just try translating an article or adapting an article or brainstorming activity ideas, and then we'll come back together to share highlights.
How much time would you like them in the rooms?
What do you think, Caroline? About 10 minutes? 5-10 minutes, good? Okay, yeah, we'll plan for about 10 minutes. We'll close it a little early, but I'm going to broadcast some ideas to run with as well.
Okay.
And just kind of let the conversation run in any direction that you want that feels exciting and useful for your classroom. Hey, everyone. Welcome back. I facilitate a lot of online sessions like this, and after maybe 4 years now of doing this, I still never leave enough time for breakout rooms. I'm always naive. They're always far too short. I see some nodding heads, so I'm just going to assume everyone agrees that there was not enough time to dig into that conversation. So apologies about that. Maybe one of these days I will learn that lesson. No guarantees. I am curious to hear any highlights. I was able to make it into 2 rooms, heard conversations about ways that students are using it, ways that administrators, not teachers, are using it. I'm curious to hear just any high-level reactions. What do you like? What do you not like? What questions do you have? How might students use this? Anyone from any room want to kind of report out either in chat or just come off mute and share any highlights of your conversation?
This topic was brought up right towards the end of our breakout, so we didn't have a lot of time to dive into it. But the question of ethical concerns using AI.
Yeah, so I have an opinion on this, but remember, I'm not an AI specialist or an expert. I'm an adult ed teacher like all of you, and I think it depends on what kind of ethics we're talking about. So, for example, one conversation came up in a room that I was in about copyright. So, for example, can we pull an article into ChatGPT, and is that ethical to do? Is that allowable to do? So from a copyright perspective, luckily as educators, we're protected under fair use. We can't go out and make money off of something we create in AI if we used, for example, an article on the internet to train it. But we can use it for educational purposes. And that's about as far as I can wade into the world of copyright laws. But I welcome other questions or perspectives, or was there a specific ethical layer that you were hoping to talk about? And Kimberly kind of asking a similar question. It depends on the tool that you're using. So Kimberly asking in chat about if we enter content in. So ChatGPT, for example, has a setting that you can toggle on and off, which is, yes, you can use my data to train your models, or no, you can't. Each tool is different. And I think that presents an interesting opportunity to have those conversations with students as well, especially when it comes to privacy. What kind of data are we giving AI? Are we okay with that data being used? Similar to using Gmail or YouTube or Facebook, those conversations about privacy policies, I think, can be drawn into a student conversation. Other questions, highlights of your group, or additional nuance on questions about ethics?
Yes, yes, and yes. We had in our group, we had some really good conversations. It was really short, but one was just from administration, director was sharing experience with being able to use it to be more time efficient. An example was, putting in, I've got this meeting agenda, I want it to do 2 hours, how to space that out, or, being very targeted to what type of correspondence that you were doing and who your audience was. And so that was great. And we were just tapping into where Marie had put in a recipe for banana muffins. And then it was like, how do you make them healthier? If you were to put in applesauce instead of oil, what would their calorie count be? And so, just ways that activity alone, how you can make a recipe healthier and have that discussion around that could really generate a lot of activities in a lesson and conversation and so forth.
Yeah, I think using it for cooking is a fantastic use case, especially because cooking websites are so annoying now. You gotta always click jump to recipe and there's 10,000 ads on it. It's just like, I just want the recipe. What's cool though is you can go into an AI bot and be like, here are all the ingredients I have. Here are the allergens I need to be mindful of. Based on these specifics, can you generate a recipe? And that's kind of a fun use case. To the first point, when I talk to teachers and students nowadays, I try to focus on saving time. Again, I'm not an expert here, and I welcome people to disagree with me on this. I'm not sure it's ready for the promise of personalized learning. For example, if a student is interacting with it, a chatbot is going to very quickly tell a student if they're right or wrong. But good teaching involves drawing that out and helping students make their own connections. Students don't always know when or where to ask for help. Good tutors, good humans do. And so when to intervene, when to provide explanations requires a nuance in communication and empathy that I don't think it's great at just yet. I do think, however, it's fantastic at saving time. And so if we as adult educators can save an hour a week because we're using AI, that's huge. I'm sure everyone in this room is wearing 3 different hats in the school that you work at, because that's the nature of adult ed. And so if we can save time, we can reallocate that time to more meaningful time with students, relationship building, supporting retention, and things like that. So any use cases that are about saving time, to me, are great. If we're focusing on personalized learning, I'm not sure it's fully there yet, but I welcome pushback on that. And thank you, Shannon. Great perspective. Other questions or comments? What did y'all talk about in breakout rooms? What are the highlights? What are the lowlights? And thank you to those of you coming off mute. I think that's helpful for creating a nice conversation.
If you want, for me, one thing that I really fear from AI, that this is like future progress technology, and in the end we are going to be going back to the 19th century. Everybody's going to be sending around the same letter with the same wording, like kind of these like letters that epistolar comments that we usually see in this kind of like Civil War documentaries. Dear wife, the winter is strong. So I think we are going to be sending us the same email back and forth, everybody. And I mean, I know for me it's funny because it's kind of like going back to those like, I don't know, formats that are like very 19th century, and progress, I think progress is bringing them back. So I don't know, it's just more like funny thinking about that. But
Joey, actually, I would like to propose a sort of flip side to that as well, Julio, because I agree with you, and especially with the Civil War letters, that's a great example to use. I think when we're talking about students who have lower literacy, or maybe English isn't their first language, that kind of standardized letter or email could perhaps get them one step further along to something that they might not have before. So, for example, if they're applying for a job where they might not have the level or the English to create the letter by themselves, it's going to give them that equal letter, because it's not just low literacy or second language learners who are using it. Native speakers are using it all the time to sort of save time. Give me a cover letter. So in some ways, I think it could offer a possibility. I'm not saying it's perfect, but could offer a possibility of standardizing something that could put a barrier to certain learners that shouldn't be a barrier. A cover letter should not be a barrier to getting, a job or an interview.
I would totally agree with that.
Any other highlights of your breakout room conversations or questions or ideas for how you've been using AI, how students might use it? Kind of curious to hear any lingering thoughts. Yeah, I see Dolly, you've got a hand raised, please.
Yes, I have used it before in some few cases, especially I teach math for GED students. So when I have a problem, a word problem that may be so challenging for special education students, that I do is to ask and ChatGPT what he suggests, or he or she, I don't know if it's he or she, but I suggest how can I present that problem, and in what way can I help those students. That is that I do. I copy and paste the problem, and I ask him. I have on my class a student that has this challenging, and he gave me some ways, and I say if give me some ideas, and maybe a step by step how can I present this problem to that student. And yeah, it has helped me, gave me some ideas how I can do it.
Cool. So if I'm understanding correctly, almost as like a brainstorming partner, as you plan activities, it's helping you explore different ways to present material. So you're using it in the planning process as you get ready for class.
Correct. That I do is I'm going to, because that I want is that no students feel that I am giving to some problems, to some students a type of exercise or problems and the others not. So I want to give them the same exercise, thing that when they share each other, that they speak to each other, they know what the problem are talking, in what problem they are working on. And so that I do is give them the the handouts difference, but to them, the special needs students, I make a particular handout for them, but the same exercises, and they know how to work with that. That is.
That makes sense. Thank you much for sharing that perspective. I also want to draw everyone's attention to Trina's comment in the chat, talking about using brisk teaching. I do think that's a good distinction to make, that ChatGPT is an open chatbot. It's general purpose. You can use it to write text, analyze data, write code, create images and videos and things like that, versus something like brisk teaching or magic school, which have interfaces that live on top of ChatGPT. So when you're using a tool like Brisk, you're still using ChatGPT, but it provides extra support. So it's almost like a general purpose versus a specific one. So you can see with something like Brisk, you can use it to create content, to give feedback, to change level. And so it almost guides you through the prompting process. What I'm trying to say is if you're sitting there feeling a little overwhelmed about the power of AI, ChatGPT can be especially overwhelming because it's a completely blank canvas. So if I were you, I would try using something like Brisk AI or Magic School, and to see if you provide that scaffolded experience provides a better process for you to kind of organize your use of AI. And I'll put both those links in chat. Any other kind of lingering questions or comments before I hand back to
Thank
Carol?
you.
Okay, so Joey's handing over to me, and I'm going to start to share my screen now, Joey, if that's okay. So where we're going next is slightly different, because we're going to look at a few tools that I believe are super useful for students. And can everyone see the let's play a game screen? We're good? Okay, just swapping over. One of the things about AI is quite often the teacher is expected to do all the filtering, to understand what it is, to give the instructions to the students, etc. But these are just going to be, and I'm running through them very quickly. At the end, we will give you a handout that will give you all the information you need on these. But get your students using a few tools. There is a tool called Semantris, which I will show you very quickly, which is a gamified word association. It will ask me, for example, guitar, to come up with a word, and I'll put in string. And then, so it's going to do word association and give points. Being cognizant of time, I'm not going to spend long on this one, but this is great for students to play around in low stakes AI and to build up their vocabulary. And it was originally here, it's a research project. You are actually helping this AI to build its vocabulary. It's particularly good for neurodivergent students because it allows them to make word associations that might not be the most obvious ones to use. And I'm very sorry if I'm rushing through these, and I do promise you we will give you the links fully at the end of this. Very quickly, this is one of my favorite ones called Magic Studio. And this Magic Studio, I can give it a prompt. So let's give it a prompt of an elephant dancing in a disco on roller skates. Let's see what it does. And you can all see I have a wonderful elephant, and it's even got the disco outfit on. Fantastic for students to play around. Again, the key takeaway here is like students are using they're having to use their English, they're having to use words to tell it to do something on all of these. So they're playing around at a very, very low stakes session with AI. I'm going to jump ahead because I do recognize that we are running out of time here. And I don't want to keep people unnecessarily long. Again, we will be sending a list, including the instructions like 3 quotes and the prompts so that you have access to these. But coming back to my penguin here, I asked it, by the way, to give me Slash as a penguin playing the guitar, and I think it did quite well. There's another one here that you draw. It's like Pictionary, but it's guessing the words as you are drawing them. It's a good way to show students how AI can work. Potentially the most useless website you'll ever see in your life is called thispersondoesnotexist.com. Now, this was originally designed to help people to spot fake photos of people, but now it's one where you can generate. This is a woman in her 50s. That's all I told it. And she's European. It's not great, but students have a great fun playing with this and seeing that AI can just create out of nowhere imagery that can be used. So right at the end, I want you to think of these questions. Now, we don't have time to go into a breakout room, so I want to leave you with these questions, but I will also leave you with my email address if anyone wants to follow up with any of these. Is think about the tools that we've spoken about today. Think about ways that you might use them or not. One of the conversations, breakout rooms I was in, actually, we have 10 minutes to go into a breakout room, correct?
This is actually scheduled to end at 3:15.
Okay, so I'm over time. In that case, ladies and gentlemen, please keep these questions in mind. You can email us because there's a lot of information to process. There's a lot to take in. The one takeaway I want to leave you with is play around with all of these tools. Question the results you get the students playing with them, but incorporate them because they're going to be used all the time, whether we want to use them or not. So let's get them involved in the process of using them.